So here we are, just a few days after Thanksgiving and first day of December. So much happened in this year and is still happening, and and our community is reconvening and in a new way, and with new energy and new volunteers and in this place. And I was reflecting how ICD is over 12 years old now. So, we've been around for quite a while. There's something here that is valuable to enough of us that we keep it going. And that's a pretty amazing thing, because no one is making us do this. We're just doing this because we want to do it. And so, to just kind of appreciate that there's something real here that is really valuable and important. And as I was thinking about this subject of gratitude and particularly generosity, I wanted to bring in an early ICD teacher and board member, Jim Gross, who some of you may remember from our early years. And he was one of the people who started this sangha, and he was our first board treasurer, and he died in 2019. And he had a beautiful openness to his way of being, and life was often difficult for him. And he had some, big health challenges, but he brought joy and positivity to everyone he met. I noticed that again and again. Every situation that he went into, the joyful attitude kept showing up, even when it was really difficult. He brought that, and he loved the Dharma, and he loved service. And in our early days of creating sangha, there were a lot of different opinions and ideas about how things should be, and board meetings that would go on for 6 hours, and literally. And Jim brought so much patience and equanimity to these difficult meetings, and he worked really hard and generously. And he spent the last years of his life bringing mindfulness practices to people impacted by the justice system and people experiencing homelessness here in Palm Springs. And I miss Jim, and I know Jim would love to be here in this circle and see this kind of new incarnation of ICD. And very much, in some ways, Jim is here, because without those efforts early on and his patience and generosity, we might not be here. So yeah, a very generous heart. And that's actually what I want to talk about today, this heart of generosity as a means to joy in a wounded world. And it's one of the beautiful qualities that we talk about, sometimes called the paramis, in Theravadan Buddhism, and paramitas in Mahayana Buddhism. But these are a sort of map of the heart. Sometimes we talk about the energies that bring oppression, or the energies that bring freedom and liberation. And the paramis are these liberating energies, the beautiful qualities of heart. And there are many names, for those kinds of energies that come from and through a heart that's responding to life from an increasingly unconditioned, uncolonized, unlimited place. This place that is our birthright, that is our deepest heart, a place of freedom, a place of freeing. And so the paramis are one beautiful framework for remembering these qualities. And there are 10 of them, and I'm not going to talk about all 10 today. But, I do want to just at least name them. I keep a little card on my desk with the 10 paramis on them. And I sometimes look at that card to see where the paramis are showing up, where I can notice them, or where I can invite them in because I really need them. So they're generosity, which is interestingly the first one, and we're going to talk in a minute about how generosity was a foundational practice for the Buddha. And then virtue or ethics, our ethical integrity, which we've been talking about over the last month, how that is really underpins the entire path and our capability of practicing. So generosity, virtue, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness. And I was reflecting how these also are the qualities that are going to help get us through what we need to get through in this country. Patience, truthfulness, resolve, loving kindness, and equanimity. And so we could do a Dharma talk on all of these, but I really wanted to start with generosity. And so the Pali word for this is dana. And so I'll talk a lot about dana today. And also chaga, which is the quality of heart that precedes dana. So dana is the action, and chaga is the sort of movement of the heart, the intention that informs the action. And these paramis, it's said that like these, all 10 of them need to be perfected or brought to fullness for a Buddha to arise in the world. So the historic Buddha is said to have lived thousands of lives perfecting these 10 qualities until they were completely full and present. And that is when he became awakened and enlightened and able to teach. And I like that teaching very much, because if it took the Buddha like thousands of lifetimes to get it all together and to perfect these practices, it's okay if it's taking me a long time. And one of my teachers at Spirit Rock, Gina Sharp, calls practice with the paramis a radical shift in identity, a radical shift in identity. So what are we identifying with? What qualities are we inviting into our hearts? What qualities are we acting from? And how does that shape our identity and who we are in the world? So we're shifting away from our limited self towards something bigger, something essential and giving and liberating. And we might call these qualities, the framework of your Buddha nature, your higher self, or whatever resonates for you. But really, it's the heart that we access when we begin to disentangle ourselves from greed, aversion, and confusion, and start bringing in these beautiful qualities of generosity, virtue, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, resolve, loving kindness, equanimity, and all the other forms of those qualities. Words are just words. They're just pointers. And it's what we know in our heart and how we practice with these concepts that actually bring about the liberating. Yeah, and again, I just want to reiterate like how Gina Sharp also says that our practice is a practice outside of time. And that also really helps me a lot. Thinking of my spiritual practice not as something that isn't urgent, but something that is outside of time. I don't know how time works, but I do know that if I keep turning my heart and mind toward these beautiful qualities and practice them, that something changes for me. So lifting our practice outside of time and space, or another teacher friend of mine, Arena Weissman, says, stop using this practice that we love as a stick to hit ourselves with. So, if it's all timed and time boxed and calendared and urgent, it's like, yeah, it turns into a stick. It turns into something that's uncomfortable and no longer fun. And our practice needs to be one of enjoyment and happiness, or as much happiness as possible. It shouldn't be something grim. So turning our mind to what is really beautiful. And so how we are in the world and how we develop these qualities in daily life in relation to ourselves, to other people, to animals, to the earth, we don't know how the ways one positive action can reverberate. And we don't know how our actions will connect to other people's actions. And the intersecting effects of your actions and my actions and their actions is sort of karma that we create together. But, I think we can be sure that every positive action extends far beyond what we can really see and know, beyond what we're able to see and know right here, right now. So just coming back to generosity for a while, talking about dana, this action of generosity. So, it's also the showing up for each other that we do. We're showing up to support each other's practice right now. So that's an act of generosity, just being here, showing up to support a community. There's giving in that. And the practice of dana, informed by chaga, that intention that precedes the action, was essential to the Buddha's teachings. And in one of the suttas, which are the teachings of the Buddha, he says, if beings knew, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared if there were someone to receive their gift, even if it were their last bite. That's how important the Buddha said giving was. So when the Buddha talked to new communities, when he came into a new town or a new country or place, even before he taught the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path, he talked about dana, giving. He talked about how giving, along with meditation and our ethical integrity, are the three pillars of the Dharma, are the support for the path. And so why would this be? Why would the Buddha teach dana or generous giving before anything else? And I thought a lot about this and talked to a friend about it. And one thing that came up was that in most traditional cultures, the practice of giving is a core value. And so this friend, Dharma friend, who grew up in Filipino culture, shared with me the fundamental importance that giving held in her culture of origin, and how it's taught from childhood as an essential way of being, an expression of care and of connection, a means of knitting community together. And so perhaps when the Buddha entered into a new community, this was an accessible place for him to connect to new students. His foundational practice already might have been something that people were already practicing culturally, a launching pad, and so a natural place to begin, something that was understood, something that they were already practicing. So we can't simultaneously let go and cling. So when we open our hand and give of ourselves or what's ours, we are in that moment letting go of self a little bit. We're letting go of separation. In the act of giving, there's a loosening of the grip on being separate, being concerned with me and mine and myself above everything else. There's a movement from me to we. There's a sense of releasing into community, into connection, into well-being together. And that's a really helpful mindset for practicing this way of freedom, this way of letting go, and beginning to thin that sense of self, that hardened sense of self and separation. The quality of generosity, the willingness to open and connect to others and the world, prepares the ground to cultivate the seeds of practice. So that's why I think it was foundational. And every act of generosity, small or large, is important because it's a loosening of that tendency to grasp and hold on to that egoic sense of separation. And it's a movement away from no and a movement toward yes, a big yes, to together, to plugging into our common humanness. It's like getting unstuck, releasing, circulating. So it brings up a question, so then how do you teach dana? How do you teach the expression of generosity? And I think you can't really teach an action. Someone can model an action for us, or they can talk about it, or we can read about it, but it's only when you do it for yourself that you really learn it, that it becomes yours. Just like our insight practice, and the insights that come from that is deepened only through our own practice, our own seeing and knowing. People can tell us all about their moments of practice and their wonderful insights, but it's only when we experience it for ourselves that we understand it deeply, that it lands in the heart. So the more we do an action or practice, especially an action of the heart, the more it's integrated into our way of being. So then can we approach dana as a place of cultivation, experimentation? It's a place to learn from. How does it actually work in your experience? How does it show up for you in the conditions of your actual life? How does it feel for you? Where is it easy? Where is it maybe even automatic? You don't think about it. And then where is it kind of sticky and difficult? And it's a really interesting place to contemplate. Are there ways of giving that come very naturally to you? And sometimes we're unconscious of these places. We take them for granted. Maybe you're really generous with your time. Maybe you're generous with the resources that you have available to you. Maybe you're just willing to listen to friends and show up for people. Maybe you're generous in giving time to communities, volunteering and organizing and supporting. And maybe there's just a natural helpfulness within you, seeing a need and filling it. Maybe it's almost second nature. Maybe you're generous with a kind word and a smile. So do we notice these beautiful places where we are able to be generous? And do we appreciate them and celebrate them? This is one of the ways of having joy in our practice, is recollecting the good qualities within us where we see them expressed. And in others too, but especially in ourselves. So yeah, it took the Buddha many lifetimes to perfect these beautiful qualities. There's a whole series of Jataka tales. There are like thousands of tales that are like folk tales. Some of them went on to become what we know of as Aesop's fables when they jumped culture. But they were tales of how the Buddha perfected patience, or how he perfected truthfulness, or how he perfected wisdom or energy. And he was all kinds of things. He was different genders, he was different kind of animal beings, and they're beautiful tales. And they just point to how gradual this practice is. And gradual, again, I go back to like, outside of time is just better for me than gradual. Like just setting aside time when I come to my spiritual practice. Bit by bit, we're replacing old conditioning, personal and cultural, that separates us from others and separates us from knowing our own innate nobility and beauty. So we all have an attitude, says Zoketsu Norman Fisher, Zen teacher, our own way of approaching life. Attitude literally means stance. The way you hold your body, your posture, the way you strive forth into your life, We come by our attitudes honestly. We get them from our parents, communities, and cultures, also from our experiences, traumas, and triumphs. We assume our attitudes reflect reality. We assume they are fixed and unchangeable. This is the water we swim in. The Buddha taught a technology for seeing deeply and freeing ourselves, waking up to old conditioning, and it starts with generosity. Chaga, that intention expressed in the action of giving, dana. So just a few places I want to share from my own experience of giving and dana, which I think about a lot. And one is to never crush a generous impulse. So stating that more positively, giving wings to chaga, to that intention when it's sort of bubbling up but hasn't been expressed. So if I notice the intention in my mind to give, to offer up what I have to benefit another in some way or a group, there's a brightness in that, there's a happiness, there's a joy in that. And then, I notice the clouds roll in a little bit. You've already given. It might not be appreciated. Let someone else do it, and so on. And then that light of the generous impulse becomes a little weaker, and the flame flickers. And then sometimes I wake up to that, and I ask, so what's going on here? Oh, there's a beautiful, generous impulse. One of my values is to not crush a generous impulse, but to give wings to it. So how can I support that intention all the way to action? And so I pause to look at it. What are my motivations for giving? And would this gift be of benefit to the receiver? How can I really be of most benefit in this moment? And in that pause and reorientation, the flame grows a little stronger. And there's a beautiful quote, and I don't know who said it, but for me it's really helpful in letting go of this zero-sum thinking that we're so immersed in culturally. But to give as though there's nothing to lose, because there's only gain in giving. To give as though there's nothing to lose. So both the giver and the receiver benefit from the act of giving, and letting go of calculations and quid pro quo. They gave me this, so I should give them that. And I can remember going on residential Dharma retreats early on in my practice and engaging in these massive mental calculations that could go on for hours at a time, when I should have been meditating, or that was my intention anyway, of like, oh, okay, it's coming up, the end of the retreat, we're going to have to offer dana. How much dana should I give? Well, there's 2 teachers, and it's a 10-day retreat, and they did have to travel here, and they did have to prepare, and how much should a Dharma teacher be paid per hour? Okay, and if we're all in this together, and everybody's paying the same amount, how much should I pay? Which has nothing to do with generosity. It has everything to do with the market economy, and is not a spiritual practice. So I kind of learned from that, and I try not to think about it, just let the movement of the heart be there. And the amount is not so important. What's important is the movement of the heart, and is there gratitude in the heart, and is there that wish to connect and support. And so when we do that kind of calculating in our giving, we're conditioning the next moment. So if I'm conditioning, this moment conditions the next. So if this moment is full of calculations and, market economy thinking and thinking about like what's wise rather than what feels good, then I've just conditioned the next moment to be also sort of calculating and tight, which is not where I want to be. So let's see. Also in the Buddhist culture, giving was celebrated. It was savored. The teachings offer us some guidelines for the practice of generosity. So there's a short list. And the first is giving with kindness and goodwill, giving with a generous heart in such a way that the receiver is respected and lifted up and not devalued in any way. So giving what's valuable to someone, not cast-offs, but what we love as well. And giving not out of obligation, so that the motivation is more allied with the heart qualities rather than the market qualities, the market mind, you know. Giving from the heart is really different than giving from the head. And giving with one's hand was also mentioned in the suttas, you know, meaning not at a remove. And if possible, actually giving hand to hand, you know, so that the whole body is involved in the blessing of generosity, the connection of giving and receiving. Giving what's useful, in other words, you know, what's of value. Giving what will actually benefit the recipient. So being thoughtful in what we give, giving what we truly believe will be for the well-being and benefit of the receiver. And more than what's given, as I keep saying, really, is whether the gift is big or small, it's the intention and manner that we give in that makes the gift alive, that really creates the spark. And there's another sutta where the Buddha illustrated this with a simile, how it's not important what we give, how much we give, but how we give and that we give. And he was talking to a follower, Vacha, and he said, I tell you, Vacha, even if a person throws the rinsings of a bowl or a cup into a village pool or pond, thinking, may whatever animals live here feed on this, that would be a source of merit, to say nothing of what is given to human beings. So just the slightest act, the smallest gift to the tiniest beings is of great, great benefit to our practice and our hearts. And nowhere in any of the lists that where the Buddha is talking about dana does he say give all that you have or give until it hurts, because it's ultimately not about sacrifice, because that's a form of violence, but about connection and loosening the compulsion to grasp and to hold on tight to what ultimately can't bring lasting happiness. So yeah, I really encourage you to notice maybe sometime this week the places where generosity comes easily for you and where you're practicing it already, you know, because it really does it's often so deep in us and so deep in the way we are in the world that we don't even notice it. You know, well, of course I do that. Doesn't everybody? No, they don't. So notice the places where you are able to bring this quality of chaga and dana into being. Yeah, and you know, and there's also a cultural shift too in giving with one's own hand. And I remember Larry Yang talking about this, how in Asia, in the monastic communities that he was in, you know, people would give from their hand, and everybody would celebrate that. So it was so different from our world, where giving anonymously is a value. And you know, we think no one must see that we've given, and sort of hiding it. But it's actually something to celebrate and appreciate in ourselves and each other. So when we do this kind of mindful giving according to the teachings, before giving, the heart and mind of the giver is happy. While giving, the mind of the giver is made peaceful. And having given, the mind of the giver is uplifted. So bringing presence and mindfulness to this whole process, from chaga, the intention, to how that intention is met and held, all the way through its expression of dana. Really feeling the whole process of generosity, not just the end result, but how does it start? How does it grow in the heart? What feeds it? So how is the heart mind when you're forming that intention toward generosity? How is it to actually make or feel that connection as you share? How does it feel when you've shared from the heart? Do you ever regret it? And I'm someone who, in much of my life, has been very good at collecting regrets. And, you know, I've spent a lot of retreats running through my regrets over and over and over again. But one thing I've noticed is that I never have regretted giving. Even when it wasn't something that was really received all that well, or maybe even used, or, you know, I don't regret the action of having given. That always feels good to look back on that, because it's about the quality that was in my heart, not about the result of that. And I've always been glad in those moments that my heart was alive enough to act, to make the act. And so recollecting our places of generosity in our lives can also be another way of inspiring joy in the practice, and recollecting the generosity of others, what's been shown to us. And so we can even start with life, how the universe and earth is so precious and yet freely shared. And we can reflect on the gift of the Dharma, the teachings that have been kept alive for so many thousands of years, 2,600 years for us, kept alive through generosity. And I mentioned that the last time I was here, like, what other organizations or structures or governments or corporations or anything have stayed alive this long, you know? But the Dharma has, and communities have, and they stay alive just because of care and sharing. So there's a beautiful book, I'm sure many of you know, called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's an Indigenous poet and writer and professor of botany, and she writes so beautifully. And there was one passage I wanted to share. The market economy story has spread like wildfire, with uneven results for human well-being and devastation for the natural world. But it's just a story we've told ourselves, and we're free to tell another, to reclaim the old one. One of these stories sustains the living systems on which we depend. One of these stories opens the way to living in gratitude and amazement at the richness and generosity of the world. One of these stories asks us to bestow our own gifts in kind to celebrate our kinship with the world. We can choose. If all the world is a commodity, how poor we grow. When all the world is a gift in motion, how wealthy we become. There's a Buddhist scholar, Taitetsu Uno, who wrote, "The actions of a generous heart are incalculable in value." And I was reflecting on that topic, and I thought about who in my early life I experienced as generosity. Where did I see generosity? And I thought of a few people who seemed giving. And I found my mind resting on a woman named Garcia Mura. And she was a friend of a neighbor who lived down the street from where I grew up. The neighbors did, and she was their friend. And she was there house sitting one summer. And she was only there for a few days. And I met her at a time in my life when I was experiencing a fair amount of neglect and loneliness. And Mrs. Mora was from Egypt, and somehow being a free-range kid in the neighborhood, like we were in those days, she and I got to talking, and she was sitting outside on her patio having tea. And she invited me to have tea with her. For the days that she was there, she invited me to come back every day and sit on the patio with her and share mint tea. And she spent, I don't know, it felt like hours, maybe it was half an hour, but it felt like a long time to me, talking to this, rather lonely 8 or 9-year-old about anything and everything. And there was nothing at all that she needed from me. although she seemed really happy to hear my thoughts and stories, just as I really enjoyed hearing hers. And my memory, the felt sense that I have even now, is that in her unhurried movement and attention and presence that was given so freely and with kindness and care, of being seen and felt and held in a very generous, loving way, so that even 50 odd years later, I can still feel that. I can still feel that care and that generosity, and I can share that now. So how far that act or those acts of generosity that Mrs. Mora showed me have traveled, and they'll keep on traveling. So this is a karma of like a single act of giving. So let's just take a minute to just breathe and let the words settle. And then I would love to hear from the wisdom of the circle and the Zoom. And maybe reflecting for a moment on your own relationship to chaga, that intention of generosity, and then dana, the act of giving. How does it show up in your life, in the conditions of your experience? Maybe even bringing to mind a time where you were generous recently in a small way or a big way. Just noticing what was the intention of the heart. How did it feel to take the action? And how does it feel to recollect that generosity, to remember it? Thank you for your kind attention and practice. And I just really love to check in with the group and see what's in your heart, and maybe how you experience generosity or a generous being that you'd like to bring into the circle. We better close here and come back next week. Thank you for being part of ICD. We don't really have membership, we just show up. And showing up means you belong. So thanks for showing up. And just taking a moment to share whatever good is in your heart right now, whatever joy, whatever well-being and ease there might be from the practice, and just sending that outward into the world, like beyond the circle, beyond borders, beyond limits, just sharing whatever is beautiful in your heart with all beings. So thank you, and see you at our Tuesday or Wednesday or Friday or next Sunday. Okay, be well.